Pranams to all of you. This is part 3 of the series of videos on the books that inspired me. So if you had watched the previous 2 videos, part 1 and part 2, you would have understood the books by the great sages of India like Krishna Ji, Ramana Bhagavan, Maharaj, and so on and so on and so on. And we covered about roughly 15 to 16 books. And in this part 3 video, we will take up some more books. The first one for today. I don't know how many of you have heard about this person or read this book, Kundalini. The title is Kundalini, the Evolutionary Energy in Man, by Pandit Gopikrishna. It's his life story. He was in Srinagar, Kashmir, and towards the end of his schooling, he stumbled upon meditation, and every morning in that cold weather he would wake up around 3:30, 4 or even earlier, take a bath in that cold water, go to his room, sit there in meditation and visualize 1,000-petaled lotus in his brain. Tantra Yoga. So he used to practice every day 2-3 hours of intense meditation. Of course, initially it was not easy, but then it became part of his life. And after you won't believe this, after 17 years of meditation every day, one fine day, 1937, if I remember correctly, one fine day when he was sitting in meditation, deeply focused on that 1,000-petal lotus in the brain, intense concentration, attention, Shraddha, suddenly he felt a very intense cold something crawling up his spine from the base to the top. One swift movement, and that distracted his attention, and he wanted to find out what happened. And he thought, maybe, my imagination. Once again he closed his eyes and focused his attention. Again, after some time, the same movement. Movement up the spine. Something very intense, powerful, going up his spine. He started wondering, what's going on? And then the third or fourth time he said, come what may, I'm not going to move away from my attention. And then he sat, focused his attention once again, and after some time the same intense energy moving up the spine, and he didn't bother. He went on focusing on that image, and then he observed, he experienced whatever this is. Those days he didn't know it was Kundalini and all that. No, he had no idea. This energy woke up, went up the spine, came through the back of his head, and flooded his entire brain with a white light fluid, whatever you want to call it. Read that book, you'll understand. And then it flooded his whole being. His normal consciousness was elevated to a very transcendental consciousness. And he didn't know how long he was there. Only when the heat of the sun coming through the window, hitting in his face, he slowly regained the bodily consciousness and came back. And he didn't know for a long time after that what really happened. But then the next 12 years or so was intense physical, psychological pain, suffering. Maybe his body was not ready, his mind was not ready, and yet the Kundalini woke up, the energy woke up, and the body was not ready to cope up with that. It was not prepared. So maybe because of all that, the intense suffering and pain, and then after 12 years it settled down, goes on like that. And after several years, that thing called Kundalini or whatever you want to call stabilized, and for good, for life, his entire consciousness, his being was transformed and lifted to a higher plane, and he lived from there all his life. So he has written, he was an ordinary, not very well educated, a government employee, a clerk in a government organization, but yet when after this experience, when he wrote these books, Kundalini and many other books, the language, all these books are in English, the language, the profound use of words, extraordinary. So this is another book that inspired me, Kundalini by Pandit Gopikrishna. The next one, Sri Nisargadatta Maharaj's disciple, one of the disciples, Ramesh S Balsekar. I remember many years ago when I was living in the campus of Amrita University in Ettimadai, Coimbatore. I still remember very vividly that particular day when I picked up his first book, Consciousness Speaks. That's the first book that came into my hand. Ramesh Balsekar. I was alone at home for some reason or the other, and I picked up this book in the morning, went on reading. I must have skipped lunch, I don't know. It was so intense, breathtaking. And by the time I finished the book, it was late evening. And after reading the book, I kept that book and I was sitting doing nothing, absolutely stunned for how many minutes or hours, I don't know. And there arose in me a very deep desire. Somehow I have to meet Ramesh Balsekar one day or the other. I didn't know how. He was in Mumbai. How to go, what, I don't know. I didn't know. And then, this is how life works. When you have a very sincere desire, spiritually or otherwise, honest, sincere, genuine desire, life, universe somehow works and brings that to you, gives that to you, or takes you to that place where you wanted to be. And so one fine day I found myself, my wife, my daughter, and we all went to Mumbai, and for some other reason, but then I had this plan to go and meet Ramesh Balsekar, and we did. For 5 days, morning 9 to 11, 11:30, 12, he was living in an apartment, his own apartment in Mumbai, and we went there, and there were a lot of other people, mostly foreigners, we all used to gather around him, and around 9 o'clock he used to come, give talks, take up questions, answers, 5 days, heaven on earth, at least to me. And the last day, I bought most of his books, almost all his books there, and I wanted to, pay cash, but I had less money. So, you know what Ramesh Balsekar said? Uday, take all the books. Forget about payment. That you can take up later on. Take all the books. And I did, of course. My sister-in-law who was there, she gave me some money and I paid to the people in his home, took all the books. In fact, they said they'll send it by parcel or whatever happened, and I bought all the books. Consciousness Speaks, Your Head is in the Tiger's Mouth, and one of his last books, The Ultimate Understanding. All these books I bought not only for my use, but basically to put that in my university library, so that other people get to know these books and read them. So Ramesh Balsekar, Consciousness Speaks, that hit me like a bolt of lightning. All my ideas about what is me, what is consciousness, wiped out clean. And it made things so clear. So that is another book that inspired me. The next one, Swami Rama. His famous book. There are quite a few books he had written, but one book which became very popular, Living with the Himalayan Masters. Classic. It's his life story, his wanderings in the Himalayas, his living with the sages of the Himalayas. Very interesting stories, mystical stories. Living with the Himalayan Masters, Swami Rama. Of course, he established his ashram in the United States and many other places. Amazing book. Swami Rama's Living with the Himalayan Masters. That's another book that inspired me. The next one. The Power of Now. The legendary Eckhart Tolle. He's still there. He's still alive. Must be 65 plus. When he was 29 years old, he was deep into depression and he tried committing suicide, but thank God it failed. And the last attempt was an utter failure. And then he screamed aloud. All that you can read in that book, in his brief life story. So he screamed aloud, I don't want to live with myself any longer. Suddenly he stopped, and a second question sprang up, which went like this. I don't want to live with myself any longer. That means there are two people in me. I don't want to live with myself any longer. Two people. So who am I? Who am I really then? That question drove Eckhart Tolle's mind into itself deep, and he lost body consciousness. And after several minutes or hours, I don't know, you can read that in the book, he came back to bodily consciousness, and when he opened his eyes, he describes, one of the things he describes, the light, the sunlight that came through the window was not sunlight, was love. So wherever he looked, it was only love. It was a manifestation of that supreme consciousness, whatever name you want to call it. That consciousness was in him, and everything else was one. He woke up. enlightenment, cosmic consciousness. And thereafter, for the next 2 or 3 years, people used to find him, watch him sitting on park benches somewhere in the US, absolutely sitting like a rock. And gradually, people who are depressed and not well in the mind and so on, they used to come and observe him, sit close to him, no talking, no words, nothing. They simply sat there and they experienced tremendous peace, stillness. And they went back fully happy. And gradually people started, wanted to find out, who is this man? Where does he come from? What does he do? And so on. And slowly he began to talk, and then later on, as time went by, he gave talks, wrote books. One of the first books he wrote is The Power of Now. The other book, Stillness Speaks. And one more book he has written, The New Earth. The new Earth, the new planet which is coming in the future, very soon. Enlightened planet. Human beings who are awakened. Oh yeah, he wrote the book about that new Earth which is coming. So Eckhart Tolle's books, oh yeah, inspired me a great deal. The next one, Old Path, White Clouds. Strange title. Thich Naht Hahn. He's a Buddhist monk, still alive, in a village somewhere in France. Oh my God, such a soft, beautiful person, Thich Naht Hahn. So he wrote this book, Old Path, White Clouds, the life and times of the great Gautama Buddha. Very simple style. Anybody can read and understand so easily. He has put all the great truths in such simple language, intermingled with Buddha's life. It's beautiful. It goes like a novel. Lovely reading. Old Path, White Clouds by Thich Naht Hahn. The next book that inspired me was by Swami Rama Tirtha. He was in his Purva Ashrama, a great mathematician, a scholar. He left all that. It's a very, very interesting life of Swami Rama Tirtha. And his books, In the Woods of God, Realization, and many other books inspired me a great deal. And of course, like Swami Vivekananda, he left his body very early. So Swami Rama Tirtha's In the Woods of God, Realization. And the next book, Deepak Chopra. Of course, he has written many books, but one of the first books that I came across, Ageless Body, Timeless Mind. Ageless Body, Timeless Mind. Deepak Chopra is a physician, MD, from India, settled in the United States, great speaker, very knowledgeable, very experienced, quite deep, and propagated so much about Indian culture, the rishis, the sages, the wisdom of India, and so on. Amazing man. He's still there, continues his work. So this is the first book of him I read. Of course, I read the other books also, but this is one book that inspired me a lot. Ageless Body, Timeless Mind. He talks about quantum healing, how the body knows how to heal itself without any external intervention. Very interesting thoughts. So that is another book that inspired me a great deal. And then the last book for this episode, for this part, Kahlil Gibran, a Lebanese poet, Kahlil Gibran. His books, in fact, one of the first books of Kahlil Gibran that I read was The Prophet. Kahlil Gibran's The Prophet. Small book, runs like a poem, but not poem, it looks like prose also. My God, he has spoken so much about children, houses, self, human beings, work, learning, studying, so many things. Beautiful. The Prophet. I remember in my classes those days, I used to quote extensively from the Prophet. In fact, the book that I compiled and edited, Beyond Personality, collected works on self-awareness and personal growth. So there I've included the entire book, compiled, edited a little bit here and there, and put it in my book, The Prophet by Kahlil Gibran. So all these books are awesome. If we know how to read, life will be different. We are not reading to escape, to run away from the sorrow and pain and suffering of life. No, we are reading because I want to know. Because I want to know, I want to understand what is going on. What is the truth about all these things? What is the truth about myself? What is the truth about the universe, the multiverse? It's a thirst. It's a tremendous thirst. It's the grace of the universe. It comes to chosen people. No, we are not saying, only chosen people. When your karmic baggage is slightly exhausted, more of these things keep coming. In fact, it is the grace. It is only grace. Like, one of the great Nayanmars, Manikya Vasagar, used to say, even to think about you, God, Bhagavan, I need your grace. Only with your grace can I even think about you, much less do sadhana. So all this, there is nothing but grace. That's what I have learned from the great masters. So all these books are so inspiring and lifting. So with this, we come to the end of part 3 of books that have inspired me. In the next part, we will take up some more books. Thank you. Thank you for listening. Pranams.